ఇది ఇంకా కనిపిస్తుంది. ఈ ఆప్షన్ ఎందుకు వస్తుంది నాకు? ఈ ఆప్షన్ రాకూడదు కదా జాయిన్ అయితే.
Good evening to all. We will just start in 5 more minutes. I request you to kindly wait as we look forward for many more people to join. So, thank you, and thank you for joining. Good evening to all. We would start this session whereby I would briefly introduce about the planned schedule of this webinar. This webinar is being organized by Center for Development of Advanced Computing as part of the Vikaspedia initiative. And this is in part of the ongoing series to celebrate the International Women's Day. The webinar is titled as Innovation and Technology for Inclusive Digital Spaces for Women. And to set the context, today we live in a digital economy and knowledge is a currency. Technology and innovation are just enablers, and if we do not harness it to make the digital space inclusive for women, ultimately women would lose out on these important areas of development. So in this regard, we have chosen 4 important themes, which are key enablers in order to ensure this digital space or the cyberspace is inclusive for women in today's arena. We have 4 distinguished speakers who will walk us through 4 such key influencing factors. One is design or user experience. And second is on digital information gaps. Third is on generative AI. And the fourth is democratizing multilingual information availability and access. So the speakers here represent reputed institutions from across the country. And each speaker would actually delve into the topic for about 20 minutes, in which they would crystallize the study they have done, the research they have taken up, their experience in this particular area for just 20 minutes. The question and answers, if time permits, would be taken at the end of the session. So with this short introduction, without wasting much time, we'll get into the first topic. The first topic for today is designing for everyone, championing inclusivity and the critical role of women in UI UX design. This session would be anchored by Mrs. Neeta Tandon, a senior consultant, Digital India Corporation. Mrs. Tandon actually is a very senior person who is championing inclusivity through her 25 years of experience in development, implementation, and capacity building from the National Informatics Center, New Delhi. She's also now part of the core team of citizen engagement platform of MyGov and is a co-lead of a very special project of the Government of India called UX4G, which is trying to improve design UI UX for government-oriented service platforms at the Ministry of Electronics and IT, Government of India. So without much delay, I would request Madam to deliver her talk on the topic designing for everyone, championing inclusivity and the critical role of women in UI UX design. Over to you, Madam. Madam, can you please unmute yourself and speak?
I'm trying to unmute it, ma'am. Hello?
You're audible now, Madam.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are, Madam.
Yes. So, good afternoon, everybody. Today, I want to talk about something that affects each one of us, the way we interact with the digital world. So, whether it is the apps that we use, the platforms we trust, or the systems that we shape our daily lives, design plays a crucial role in how we experience the technology. So, ultimately, when we talk about technology, we also talk about the contribution that each one of us can make. So, when we talk about gender parity, we talk about a lot of other things, but at the same time, we need to talk about the role of the crucial role that the women play in the design systems. So I would like to say here that despite living in the world where half the population identifies as the women, the voices of the women are still missing, not only in the design processes, but also in the design leadership. Today, we'll explore why inclusivity in UI UX design isn't a luxury, it is a necessity. So when I say UI UX, It is user interface and user experience. And in user interfaces of our apps and our platforms, and we feel that when we talk about user experience, we only talk about experience that wherein we do not take the opinion of women, wherein they are a big population. We'll also discuss how women bring unique value to the design teams and why their presence in decision making roles leads to a better and a holistic products. So let's start with it. The first thing that I would like to talk about is why inclusivity in UI UX design matters. So when we say inclusivity, that we want to include everybody when we design, uh, design means design products, and we have to take into the experience that various kind of people have, regardless of their gender, age, ability, or background. It's about ensuring that no one is left behind. When we fail to design inclusively, we create barriers. Let us have a couple of examples in the real world. So, when we have all seen the voice assistants, and let me talk about the gender bias in these voice assistants. Uh, did you all know that most of the voice assistants historically struggled to recognize female voices accurately? This happened because the initial training data favored only male speech patterns, overlooking half the population. Then, when we talk about health apps and gender gaps, when Apple first launched health app, it tackled everything from steps to sodium intake, but completely ignored the menstrual health. This critical oversight left millions of females users feeling invisible. Safety concerns. So, in urban navigation, tools fail to account for women's safety needs, like well lit paths or emergency stops, because these considerations aren't always part of the design conversations. When we exclude diverse perspectives, you design exclusive into the products. And it's not just a user issue, but it's a business issue. Companies that prioritize inclusive designs perform 35% better in innovation and in market research. So the next thing is why women must be considered proto users. Women aren't a niche market. They drive 70 to 80% of consumer purchasing decisions globally. Yet many products continue to treat them as afterthoughts. When we design with women in mind, products become better for everyone. For example, transportation design, including women in transit planning, has led to a safer and more accessible public transport systems. Similarly, when we come to financial technology, women designers advocating for gender inclusiveness, UX has pushed for more equitable access to credit scoring models, which historically disadvantaged women. Ignoring women isn't just a missed opportunity; it's a design failure. By recognizing women as a prototype users, a priority consideration rather than a secondary one, we can create solutions that reflect the real world. So when we talk about all of this, we have to talk about the value women bring to the design teams. Diverse teams don't just think differently, they think better. Women bring unique strength that elevate both creativity and user empathy. Let's break down a few strengths of the women. First of all, as I have told you, that we are talking about the empathy. So empathy and design and the driven designs, women also bring a holistic perspective, considering emotional and contextual user needs. This leads to design that are not just functional but meaningful. multitasking, and complex management. Women are natural system thinkers, able to juggle complex, multidimensional problems, which is essential for creating intuitive and seamless user experience. The kind of responsibilities that the women take uh, in their professional and their personal lives, I think gives them that strength. So, challenging bias. Women in design questions default assumptions, ensuring products serve not just the average users, but full spectrum of humanity. So when we talk about all of this, we need to here put in our thoughts together for how women encourage all of this. So considering uh, a couple of examples more, so we have another evidence. Companies with gender diverse leadership see 25 percent higher profitability and better problem solving outcomes. So when we so now when we talk about necessity of women in design management roles, so we can put in here that the representation matters. Not just our teams, but the tops. Women in design leadership shape the policies, strategies, and the decisions that impact millions of users. Why does this matter? Diverse decision making. Now, when we have women in inclusive designs, we have female leaders bring unique perspective to complex business decisions, ensuring that inclusivity becomes part of the company's DNA. Mentorship and advocacy is the second point that I would like to raise here. Women in leadership pave the way for the next generation of designers, fostering equality and access across industries. Product impact. Research shows that the products overseen by gender diverse teams are 30% more likely to meet user needs across gender and cultures because of the kind of the diverse responsibilities that the women hold. I think here we contribute to the design is also of a great importance. Without women in these roles, we risk continuing a cycle of exclusion, and this is not a failure we can afford. Practical steps to design more inclusive. So, how can we, as designers and decision makers, ensure inclusivity in more than buzzword? Here are three actionable steps that we have. Diversify proto users is the first one. Include women and other underrepresented represented groups from the start of your design systems. Ensure user persona reflect real world diversities. So when we design, we need to keep the women persona into uh, for inclusive designs. Intersexual testing. Go beyond gender. Test your designs with women of different ages, different backgrounds, and abilities to surface the hidden biases. So the third thing that I would like to raise here is bias audits. Implement regular audits to identify and correct design that inadvertently exclude user based on gender or other identities. Inclusive design isn't a one-time initiative, it's a continuous commitment to challenges, assumptions, and centering human experiences. Finally, I would like to conclude here by saying that good designs is good design is an inclusive design, and an inclusive design is impossible without the voice and leadership of women. When women are recognized as proto users, we create products that truly work for everyone. When women lead design decisions, we foster innovation that drive both social and business impact. But this won't happen unless we advocate for change by uplifting women, amplifying diverse perspectives, and committing to building a digital world that reflects all of us. I leave you with a challenge. The next time you design something, ask yourself, who's missing from the table? Because when we design for everyone, everyone wins. So this is what is my thought. Thank you so much for patiently listening to it, and I'm sure with all of this, we'll be designing whichever field we work on. We'll have women inclusive designs. So thank you all for patiently listening. I would request the next speaker to please take over.
Yeah, thank you, madam. Thank you for your insightful talk on insisting even how bigger players, when they are not sensitive to the utility and the requirements of a gender biasless design, can not only be a failure in terms of economic terms, but also in terms of excluding the most important part of a population in a country. So thank you for that insightful message on how there should be deliberate efforts on every part of the team, so that the design is inclusive and nobody is excluded as part of the design elements. Thank you very much, madam. So with this, we will go on to the next session. The next session is titled Bridging Digital Information Gaps for Inclusive Cyberspace for Women. Dr. Vanishri Joseph from the National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, Hyderabad, would be delivering this talk. She has got over 20 years of extensive experience in the field of gender and rural development, focusing on mainstreaming gender analysis across diverse domains of rural transformation. She currently serves as the head at the Center for Gender Studies and Communications Resource Unit of NARDPR in Hyderabad. Her recent research explores critical intersections between gender and emerging technologies, especially addressing coded discrimination, gender blind spots in artificial intelligence. Through her scholarly and advocacy work, Dr. Joseph is actively engaged in promoting inclusive digital spaces and highlighting the importance of gender-aware technological innovation. So with this brief introduction, I would request Dr. Vanishri to take over and deliver.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Hope I am audible enough. Yeah.
Yes, madam.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my views about bridging digital information gaps for inclusive cyberspace for women. I thought in this 20 minutes, the one third of the session, one third of the time I would be talking about purely from academic background, positioning my argument, like how I'm building my argument, focusing on why that gap is there. So I'll continue from Neeta Tandon's ma'am, she said, whenever you design next, think about what is being left. So I'll focus on my argument, how the whole design is made. And the second thing is because of that, there is some lacunae in the whole design and how women are suffering because of that. And third argument will be on how do we rectify this so that the gap can be bridged. So we all acknowledge that there is a gap in this digital technology. So what is this technology? If we consider this technology as a situated knowledge which has emerged out of someone's knowledge, always knowledge has a bias based on the creator's position as well as the own bias of the society. So any technology or any kind of knowledge which is put forth in the society will be always biased based on the creator's positionality and the bias in which the creator is brought up in the society. So maybe we can situate the whole argument in a structural inequality perspective. Okay, so this whole structure, be it we call as a patriarchy, you call it like any form of institutions, there is always a structural inequality where everyone is not treated equal. So that is the basic premise. And why this everybody is not treated equal? The whole system is designed in a way, maybe it started from patriarchy, considering one sex as dominant and other one is subordinate. Here I'm talking it from a binary perspective. So it is like either male versus female, or mind versus body, or natural versus artificial, or human versus machine, whatever. So this technology indeed should help us go beyond the dualism, which is, and this dualism is always reinforced by the patriarchy. And that patriarchy has created the hierarchies, and in hierarchies we face structural inequalities. This is one thing. So everything whatever we analyze now is biased, and we are trying to rectify it, we are trying to progress. So that even though there is no perfection, we are trying to progress, we are trying to evade the inequality, we are trying to bridge the gap. So that is my first point. And second thing, how this inequality is getting manifested in the context of digital information, or the technology which provides information quickly through digital platform. So again, here we are going to talk about women, and all women cannot be treated as a single category. There are certain intersectionalities. For example, rural women and urban women. What facilities rural women get and what facilities urban women get in terms of digital technology, there is a clear-cut bifurcation. So again, women cannot be treated as a homogeneous category. So again, we have to look from the intersectional perspective in terms of geography, whether it is like rural or urban, or in terms of class, whether they are poor women or rich women, or like labor women, or like wage laborers, or income based work. So based on the class also, we can see like the inequality perpetuates in a, I mean, manifest in a different form. And again, we all know like the structural inequality in terms of the caste and the other oppressive mechanism in India, particularly in India, is also deeply rooted. So this social hierarchy based system will also provide certain advantage to particular group of women, and not that same is not available to other women. So the second point which I'm putting forth here is like all women cannot be treated. So the first one is, yes, there is a strong bifurcation between the opportunities enjoyed by men and women, because the system itself has created that biasness. And second thing is like all women cannot be treated as a homogeneous category, because it's like we have to look from the intersectionality perspective, being it towards the geography or class or caste, or even like if we have further more classification, even among a homogeneous caste group, there are several bifurcations. So this is my second point. So how we are trying to bridge the gap? So are we trying to bridge the gap between rural women and urban women, or are we trying to bridge the gap between the whole binary of men and women? So we have to be very sure whenever we are coming out with any policy interventions for bridging the gap. So we have to be very clear. And to be very clear, do we have data? No, we don't have that much of data. And getting gender segregated data in all domain is very, very difficult. And even though if we get, we will be getting it only in terms of binary, male, female, and we don't have any other classification for non-binary categories. So that is like the second. So there is lacunae in the data. And yes, we all know that like now the technology leads lots of information. AI works based on information, and what information we are going to provide to AI? Is it going to be very generic information, or we are going to give particular information? So somebody else will be talking about that, so I'll not touch upon that. So now when we talk about the gap. What are all the gaps? So we all agree that this gap has been created because of the discriminatory practices in the society. That is point number one. And second thing, the availability gap. For example, the access and use of internet. So this we all know, like in India, I was like looking for some data. It says like 58% of men were using internet against like 42% of women using internet. Okay, I mean, men have also not reached 100% and women have also not reached 100%. But when we compare between men and women, yes, there is a gap, like about 16% gap is there. And even within that category of women, we do not have separate data for rural, urban, or against the class or against the caste. So it is very, very generic, and there might not be, it is just an average of putting together, treating all women as a homogeneous category. So that is the second. So we have gap. There is like gap in the access, and as well as there is gap in the data as such. Then about okay, we have internet. So with internet, what skill am I going to get? Yes, whether what this digital media, is it going to provide me skill? Am I going to use this as a tool to enhance my livelihood opportunity or enhance my knowledge of what? So we are not so clear about like what this digital platform is going to provide, both for men and women, and for women in particular, like if we go as per the topic of the discussion today. So the policy intervention should be also very clear. So maybe we have to go beyond talking about like how many of them are having internet or how many of them are having smartphone. Yes, fine. Beyond that, what sort of utility they are going to get out of this digital platform, if I confine it only through, I mean, to the availability of internet and to the availability of smartphones or whatever gadgets is this. So these are like very basic analysis when we talk about the gender gap. And next, two gaps are important. One is about the gap in participation in STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. There is a wider gap. And yes, of course, we are coming out, Government of India and United Nations are coming out with several programs to promote women in STEM field. That is also very much important. So that will also help, because if these women become a creator, they will be also coming out with their own creation based on bias, which might be benefiting women alone. Yeah, and if intersectionality matter is taken into consideration, so they will be targeting about the women whom they are representing. So presence of women, the two presence of women from different categories and classifications we have in the society, if they are representing themselves in STEM field, then I see like there might be a change. So in political science, we call this as a critical mass. So we I mean, critical mass is, we all know, like it's a nuclear physics concept. When we are talking about nuclear fission, so we need to add certain amount of uranium, and after certain point, without any further addition of uranium, the fission process happens. So that point is called critical mass. So we borrowed that in political science, stating that if women are certain in percentage, or if they were like in number in certain position, if they have a higher edge over others, then the whole process, the whole discourse will change. So women's participation in STEM field is very much necessary, so that the whole creation, the situated knowledge creation will change from male bias oriented to female bias oriented. And even within that, I am reinforcing my argument again, intersectionality component should be taken into consideration. Then the third one, the gap in tech sector leadership and entrepreneurship. So in all field, we all know that glass ceiling is there. And yes, several reports have stated that in technology field, this glass ceiling is very strong. And on the other hand, we are not promoting women entrepreneurs to get into the technology field, especially in, I mean, any startups related to digital technology, so on and so forth. Maybe we might require a major policy shift. Of course, yes, government of India has come out with many policies and programs. Maybe some more attention should be paid exclusively for uh, startups related to digital technology, or promoting leadership in technology sector, whereas like women can climb up the ladder. So I think like these four are very much important. So now, like, where are we moving towards? uh, so again, I'll take you from the academic background. Like, in 1990s, there were like two uh, theories like which were put forth. One is like the techno feminism, another one is cyborg feminism. The techno feminism, it talks about like inclusive participation in technology, innovation, and design. That is what said by Anita Madam, which is Anita Tandon Ma'am, which is very much required to create a critical mass of women in the technology, so that they will come out with a creation which might be favoring women. And the second one is about the cyborg feminism. There was an interesting paper published by Donna Haraway as a cyborg manifesto, which talks about transcending the boundaries. So it is not like men and machine. So it is not like male and female. The cyborg is like cybernetic organism. Organism has life, and cybernetics, it's like the electronics. So when these sports come together, there is a possibility of breaking down this binary classification, going beyond dualism. So in that process, women will be also benefiting it. Maybe the situation should be conducive enough to create such kind of uh, mechanism, so where that we can come out uh, with a tool or mechanism where we can bridge the gap, where women can have accessibility, availability, and utility of digital platform. So I can give some examples. So this is not like not happening. Yes, India, we try to have. You all must be knowing about National Rural Livelihood Mission. During that pandemic period, there was like, you all know, like we all suffered, and that time like digital money transaction was promoted, and these women, they played a crucial role. These women, in the sense, like under NRLM, digital sakis were created. So these are the women uh, who were trained in technology, and they were helping other women just to use the mobile phones, just training them like how to transfer the money, how to provide banking service to women at the doorstep. So this, so there was a case study available on digital sakis, especially in Madhya Pradesh, documented by UN Women and other organizations. And Seva also initiated like digital initiative. So they were trying to uh, provide knowledge for women under their organization. And you all must be knowing about Google's Internet Sadi. So where they were trying to train women to use the technology, and those women will be again training other group of women, like it's like a snowball method. So we all doing it. So will that alone be sufficient? I would say that alone will not be sufficient. Yes, of course, we need to create a space. And in that space, what are all the different things we have to do? So, before creating a space, I would suggest like we need to have a digital gender audit. So, where we can uncover and address implicit biases in digital platform. So it is not only providing like how many men are availing this, how many women are availing internet users. Maybe we have to go beyond it. Maybe we can classify the whole digital industry, and in that we can see how gender. I mean, we can look into the gender audit of the whole system which is in place to promote digital technology. So I feel like the first thing we have to do is like a digital gender audit. And yes, this digital literacy and critical awareness should be part and parcel of it, and it has to be taken up in a continuous manner, like whoever the institution is. So whatever the domain is, so that should be a continuous effort, irrespective of like what other activities we do. And the third thing which I would like to point out is like, are we doing gender responsive budgeting? So gender responsive budgeting, of course, yes, in India, in ministries and all, they have adopted, and you all know that statement 13 of India budget talks only about gender budget, like how different allocation of money is happening in different ministries across different schemes. Here I mean the gender responsive budgeting for creating digital infrastructure. So it is not like a separate budget for women. So whenever we try to allocate budget for creating any digital infrastructure or coming out with uh, any transformative approach, we need to say like whether this allocation in the budget is really going to benefit women, and if at all it is going to benefit women, which kind of women will be benefiting out of it. So it will be like a forerunner to the gender audit. So this gender audit, digital gender audit and gender responsive budgeting for digital infrastructure should be carried out. Maybe I would suggest like CDAC can take a project on it and try to analyze the gender audit and try to analyze your own budget, as maybe it might be post facto analysis of the budget on digital infrastructure or whatever digital technology which you are coming forth with. So this kind of analysis, if we do, we will get to know where we are lacking, where we are spending more, and who are not covered under this whole digital technology. So until otherwise we have the strong evidence, we will not be able to come out with a policy measure to solve this issue of gender gap, or like uh, will not be able to address why certain groups are not included or why certain group are excluded from the cyberspace. So, and finally we have to also think like through this what we are trying to do, because this digital inclusion should go beyond welfare based approaches. So okay, it is not like, okay, women, if we teach a woman to use her mobile, what she is trying to achieve out of it? It's like just being in WhatsApp, or like is she trying to generate, I mean, is she going to use in her economic generation activity, or is she equipping herself, educating herself, or is she going to help her children by using this digital space? So it should not be confined only to the welfare approaches, like, in other welfare approach, like if women are finding it hard to fetch water, walking for a long distance, provide them at the doorstep. It's a welfare approach. So digital providing this cyber space for women should not confine it only to the welfare approach. Rather, it should empower them to being it like and social empowerment or economic empowerment or financial empowerment. So that's how, for what they are going to use this digital space. That should be also very clear. And ultimately the safety and security measures are very, very, very important. As if like violence against women is very high, maybe because of non-reporting our percentage must have been less, but in spite of that, like violence against women are high, and we all know like the cyber crime and coupled with inadequate legal framework should not aggravate the situation further. So maybe we have to look it from different perspective, like how are we going to, I mean, the existing digital platform, whether it is friendly to women and whether it is friendly to all segment of women, that should be done. And second thing, whatever budget we are allocating, and for whom it is going to be used, so that analysis should be done. And the third thing I would say is like everything should be analyzed from a security perspective as well. I mean, whatever the space is being created for women, we have to make sure there is a safety mechanism in place. And here, like cyber or the digital, if it is like virtual, the harassment might be also virtual, and we have to make sure the legal framework also gets stronger for supporting women, not when the incidents happen, even before that, how to prevent it. And continuous training will be also part and parcel of such kind of initiative. So these are the points which I wanted to discuss. Maybe if there are some questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much, Vijayalakshmi ma'am, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Vanishri. I think as building on the points that were laid by Madam Neeta on designing for women, which was more of a binary approach. Dr. Vanishri has built over that foundation by adding the nuances of the differences even among women. So the heterogeneity that arises even among a so-called homogeneous population or the binary aspect of women. And what are the gap areas which still are challenges if we will have to make our cyberspace more inclusive for women in terms of gender disaggregated data, in terms of thinking out of the box, and not only from a welfare point of view, in terms of how do we institutionalize policies, and how do we take deliberate actions in ensuring that whatever are the lacunas are not continued or not amplified, but rather being addressed with a very out of the box ideas. And as cyberspace grows, so are the challenges in terms of cyber crimes. So it is just not going to be a one-time affair of designing and addressing the challenges, but it is going to evolve continuously so that the cyberspace and the gaps that exist in making it inclusive for women are addressed in a longer run and just not in a very short-sighted approach. Thank you very much, Dr. Vanishri, for putting the perspective from the academic and also from the existing gaps in terms of data and other things that are there currently. So now with this, we move on to the next session, which is equally interesting. It is building generative AI, which is gender friendly. A very interesting institution, the Apti Institute. Ms. Aishani Rai, who is a manager at Apti Institute with a background in law. Her work at Apti revolves around mapping and mitigating harms stemming from technology, with a focus on platforms and emerging technologies, including AI. Through her works, she seeks to unpack the role of participatory frameworks as a means to build inclusive and equitable technology and also govern it responsibly. More recently, she has explored the nuances of information integrity landscape by unpacking the risks that stem from synthetic content produced by Gen AI and working towards designing responsible frameworks of governance. Interestingly, they have also submitted a report to the UN which highlights the gender issues that revolve around Gen AI. So in her talk, Aishani Rai would actually be delving into how do we make a Gen AI a gender-friendly AI. So with this, I hand over the session to Aishani.
Thank you so much. So first off, good evening and hello everybody. I would like to thank CDAC and Vijay ma'am for this opportunity to for giving me this opportunity to walk you all through some of our insights at Apti on building gender-friendly AI and more specifically Gen AI. I think at this juncture, I must call out that while Gen AI as a topic of focus has been in the spotlight for the last 2 years, just given the innumerable incidents that have affected women, especially due to the circulation of objectionable images, AI itself more broadly and its usage across various sectors, be it health or in finance, has had discriminatory effects against women and gender minorities. And this goes back to a time even before Gen AI drew most of the attention for the reasons that I just stated previously, right? And as ma'am mentioned previously, yes, we submitted a report, but there were two reports to this. There were two UNDP reports. The first, I think, we looked at the consequences and the risks that stemmed from AI. And the second report, we delved specifically into Gen AI. And both the reports comprised of mitigating strategies. And we did have a gender lens. To both of the reports. So I will first be delving a little bit and giving a bit of a macroscopic perspective of what some of the harms look like when we speak of AI more broadly across two sectors, right? The first being the financial sector, and the second being the healthcare sector. And then I will jump into the second part of the conversation, which is Gen AI. So when we speak of the financial sector, I think one of the key use cases was AI-based credit scoring and lending. When we speak of AI-based credit scoring and lending, there are so it basically it finds empirical relationships between new factors based on the collection of large data sets and the credit worthiness of the consumers. Now, the gender lens to this, or the impact or the risks that actually happen, is that cases have been reported of AI scoring female applicants lower than males, despite similar financial backgrounds. And there was this famous Goldman Sachs Apple credit card process, which showed one such example where the wife was granted a lower credit limit than her husband, despite both of them filing joint tax returns and her having a higher credit score. And again, during the course of both the projects, as we interviewed several experts, they did note that women are more likely to face a loan rejection if lenders determine creditworthiness based on the number of phone contacts, given that men have more social mobility than women in India. So we see that how women. That the impact for women is always aggravated, uh, given the fact that they already participate in limited capacities in the economy and are further trammeled by the lack of financing to start their own businesses, right? And what we then also notice is that when these loans are not paid, especially this becomes extremely important in the case of a predatory app, we see that there is an additional threat to life, dignity, and safety, which is aggravated for both women and children, who are more susceptible, given that there is the likelihood of facing rape threats and demands for inappropriate pictures are greater amongst these vulnerable populations. Similarly, on the other hand, even when we look at the healthcare sector, the other use case is that of predictive analytics, right? Which is another use case of AI with immense potentiality to transform healthcare services, even within India. But from the perspective of gender, the impact of biased data sets would be disproportionate for female populations, as indicated in several studies. So there was. I think two studies. The first one indicated that missing data in your electronic health records or incomplete electronic health records introduce bias towards older female patients. At the same length, there was another study which assessed digital biomarkers for Parkinson's disease. Now, in this particular study, what we realized is that the symptoms for male patients were more accurately detected than the female counterparts. And the reason, when they actually got down into understanding what the reason for this what the reason for this was because mainly that in the sample size, only 18% of the sample size were that of women. So the detection rates to accurately determine Parkinson's in women was lower, and this has a direct impact on female on the health of females, given that it can be possible that it's not just that the symptoms are not being detected, but they can also be inaccurate detection. So in both of these cases, we see that how AI more broadly, even before the advent of Gen AI per se, has been perpetuating risks for women and other non-binary genders across several domains and several use cases. So this just goes to say that even though Gen AI has taken most of the has taken forefront of the conversation now, the conversation around AI and its impact on women and other gender minorities has always been the case, even before, say, 2022, when very many of these cases came into light with respect to Gen AI. Right. So now specifically, as we move into building gender-friendly Gen AI, before we begin to understand what some of these pathways of building, gender-friendly Gen AI could look like, I think it's important and very extremely critical for us to also understand what some of these risks could look like, right? And how they are exasperated for these non-binary genders, specific in the context of Gen AI. So the development and deployment of Gen AI has, of course, witnessed appreciable human rights consequences, and there are several harms which most of us are aware of in terms of violent speech. There is always the case of bias and exclusion, invasion of privacy of vulnerable and marginalized populations. So these are the common risks that occur. The manifestation of it, of course, varies depending on the type of population and also on the use case and how you are using the tool for your service. And to be able to unpack what these risks that are produced by Gen AI look at, what we did as a research team at APTI was that we undertook the value chain approach. Now, what exactly is this value chain approach? The value chain approach really broke down the how you build Gen AI, and we, in our opinion, and this is after consulting several experts both in the technical and the non-technical domains, we concluded that there were three main phases. The first being the data set preparation, then modeling, and then the model deployment, right? So our study specifically looked at the risks that may be posed to women and gender minorities across all the three phases. And therefore, the mitigation strategies, which I will be walking you through in the next part of the session, corresponds to each of the particular stage. So moving on, I will be looking at each of the three phases separately, and I will also be looking into what the mitigation strategies look like at the end. So first, when we speak of the data set preparation stage, I think it runs the risk. The key risk that it runs is that of erasing women and gender minorities from data sets due to the adoption of a gender blind approach. Now, what exactly do we mean by this? So there is a lot of research that highlights that a digital divide exists between men and women's adoption of or even affinity for the usage of a digital technology, right? Now their interactions and like our interactions with the data collection expert highlighted that what happens is that women are most often invisibilized or unaccounted for when collecting data from field surveys. And to add on to this, depending on the socio-normative structures that exist, especially in India, representation of women is often limited to data sets due to their household roles. So the absence of diverse gender identities in data, what happens is that it reduces meaningful representation within the data sets. And to add on to this, the lack of awareness around inclusionary data practices, the lack of training in data management practices further increases the potential of the harms that could emerge in this particular stage. And I can quickly give you an example of how this really plays out in real life. And this, for instance, when we look at the lack of inclusivity in pre-training and training data that is procured from the internet, what happens is that it brings a large variety of stereotypes with it. In translation, these stereotypes generate images that either over sexualize women or depict trans and non binary identities as alien concepts. So, if these are the risks that broadly stem due in this particular stage, we then move on to the second part, which is that how do we really mitigate the risks that occur in the data set preparation stage? And to my mind, the first one is that businesses should work towards building collaborative and inclusive data collection practices, which allocates resources for this and monitoring progress to create the application in ways that understands the nuance of the problem, right? And this all has to happen in a much more inclusive manner. And I can give you two examples from the field basis our research. So there is the first one is that of Karya. So Karya is an organization. It's a data set builder building organization out of India. And what they have done is that they have incorporated gender intentional design principles in their data collection practices to ensure that 50% of the cohort is always female. And this mandate does not change with the gender centric nature of any project. The second example that comes to my mind is that of OpenAI. So OpenAI is also another is one of the many rather initiatives by Agami, another foundation based out of India. And what they do is that they provide AI development tech and know-how to other players in the legal tech ecosystem, right? Now, what they essentially do is that they label the data for their justice chatbot by involving law students across law students who validate these data sets. Now, these practices ensure that the models are equipped with understanding and are also, in some way or the other, representative of the larger population, larger portion of the demographic that they are meant to cater to. The second practice, the second practice to really mitigate or curb or to ensure greater representation of data sets would be like having a higher reliance on open source data sets. Now, the reason why we focus on open source data is that it's built on the contributions of broader developer communities and of course are available for anyone to download and utilize, right? Now this ensures that there is an expanding user base for a data set along with developers trusting the businesses due to the collaborative nature of the data sets. So these two practices amongst many others could directly not solve but at least help in mitigating some of the risks and ensuring greater representation of both women and other gender minorities in your data sets. Then we move to the next stage. Now, the next stage is that of modeling, right? Now, modeling appraises a different set of human rights risks. And again, in the modeling stage itself, we see that there is a gender blind design and assumptions restricted to binary or cis male notions, and that translates to biases against women and underrepresented gender groups in the way the technology is built. Now, these design assumptions in GenAI are often human-made choices influenced by a person's conscious or unconscious bias in decision making. So I'll just give like an example. Say if there are a bunch of data sets, you as a developer can choose which data set you can work with, right? So if there is an inherent bias, and you are not able to detect, you don't have a keen eye of being able to detect which data set is more biased against certain population groups, there is a possibility of you making a choice towards data sets that are more biased, right? And so ultimately your human decision or your human made choice at that stage influences at this particular stage. And this is what we mean when we speak of design assumptions. There are of course other issues related to the limited representation, and I think this has also been highlighted by by both the speakers before me, in terms of limited representation of women and gender minorities in the workforce, particularly at the development stage. And what essentially happens is that the gender disparity creates uneven distribution of power and leadership in the AI sector. And ultimately, how does it translate on a daily is that it affects how much of a role representation plays in data sets and the final end algorithmic product, right? Now, not only is the fact that we have lesser women and other gender minorities in these leadership roles, even within the current set of developers that we have, we unfortunately do not see them being extremely gender sensitive. So there is a lack of, or rather inadequacy of gender sensitive training, which further hinders inclusive development. So this lack of diversity results in AI systems, I would call it mirroring a certain homogeneity, and that lacks inclusivity and intersectionality, right? And again, if you were to translate it to an example, we see that all the security robots that are built end up being primarily male, but when we speak of service and sex robots, they are always represented as primarily female. And this again has been has been highlighted in our research. Moving to the part where we speak of pathways to mitigate the risks in this particular stage, right? In my perspective, the risk mitigation strategies rather can be divided into two parts. The first, and this is only for this stage, the first is those that speak to the number and the training that the developers receive. Within the system. So, this includes increasing the number of women and other gender minorities in leadership roles, along with providing the right kind of gender sensitization to the existing cadre of Gen AI developers, right? Now, businesses should invest in building capacities, and there are several tools that exist. You have the gender dimensions of the United Nations guiding principles, and there are a list of it's a laundry list of items, or actionable items that a business can take, and very many of this should be represented and embedded in their frameworks of building the AI. The second set of measures speaks to embedding a system of checks and balances to mitigate the risk. And this is more on the technical and the procedural side of things for businesses, right? And this, for instance, this could translate where businesses should deploy evaluations, fulfilling responsibilities of conducting impact assessments to mitigate, adverse human rights impacts. Evaluations of Gen AI models, there has been highlighted a way which we found extremely interesting, and which is why we also highlighted it in our research, is to do is like where you have evaluations conducted through community in the loop methodologies, and it involves participation from a variety of stakeholders. So there was a benchmark. I think it goes by the name of We Know Queer. So it's a benchmark which was specifically designed to measure whether LLMs, encode biases harmful to the LGBTQIA plus community, and it is a community sourced and a surveyed tool for such purposes. Apart from this, there are other technical measures, and I think the technical folks in the room may be better, equipped to answer some of to gain and to have a better understanding than us policy folks. But this is something that we also highlighted, which is in cooperation of red teaming measures and reinforcement learning from humans. So these were methods that we think that can be embedded more proactively from the business side of things. And now we move to the final stage of building a Gen AI tool, which is that of model deployment. And I think this is the stage that most of us are familiar with, given that it affects us as daily users of very many of these Gen AI services, things that we are able to see, we hear from our peers, and the kind of harms that they may have may have felt as they have interacted with many of these services on a day-to-day basis, right? So this stage, of course, exhibits the risk. The main risk is that of perpetuating gender stereotypes, reinforcing rather these gender stereotypes, and of course other human rights issues which stem from AI and from the dissemination of AI enabled misinformation, misgendering, and underrepresentation, right? And the third part to it, we see there is an other layer, which is that there is also an added risk of online harassment and gender based violence, which have also emerged as serious risks, with pornographic deepfakes being a critical case in point. Now, when we look at the most common risks, I think what I gave was like the broad overview of risks. But when we look at how these risks really play out on a day to day basis, and to give some examples, when we speak of gender stereotypes, right, it finds its way into Gen AI services and systems, because there is a fundamental lack of gender friendliness, or rather inclusiveness in the content and usage policies, as well as in the prompt engineering efforts of the Gen AI tool itself, right? And this is again publicly available information. So stable diffusion, which is another Gen AI application, it categorized images of different occupations according to gender-based stereotypes. So what essentially happened is that men were more likely to be perceived as engineers, CEOs, doctors, and politicians. However, women were perceived as lower paid teachers, social workers, housekeeping, amongst others, right? So we see how there is a certain translation and reinforcement of stereotypes regarding with respect to the with respect to the with respect to one's own gender and the occupation. We move to the second one, which is misinformation. And misinformation can thrive if not actively contained by businesses, of course, in the Gen AI ecosystem, right? Now, when we speak of misinformation, it essentially is the spread of false or inaccurate information, which is fueled by misgendering and underrepresentation. And it can be used to willfully abuse the human rights of very many of the gender minorities. Now, what essentially happens, it particularly affects women, mainly because there is an overwhelming rise in pornographic deep fakes, and which should be considered as manipulated content. Now, the major problem with respect to this content is that it's so convincing that it almost becomes rather impossible for us to differentiate it from actual instances. Now, another layer when we speak of misinformation is that your harms are not just, there is not just an online interface or an online modicum to the harms. What essentially happens is that most of these harms which are perpetuated through the digital or the online modicum through your Gen AI tools also has an offline impact, right? And that's when we move to understanding the risks and impacts in terms of online harassment and violence. So when we speak of the case of, again, pornographic deep fakes or any AI generated synthetic content, they have been used to create pornographic representations of women. And Sensity AI, again an organization, it estimates that 90 to 95% of online deepfake videos are non-consensual, and unfortunately 90% of them feature women. So this goes to show the scale, the speed, and rather the intensity of how these harms actually the existence of these harms in the very first place, and then also the impact and the rather the exasperated impact on only certain population types. If we were to then move again to the last part of this particular talk, which is risk mitigation strategies, like what could risk mitigation strategies really look like when we speak of in the model deployment stage. So the first one would be that businesses should adopt, again, innovative and measures and strategies to strengthen existing ones, and making sure that the models are not biased or rather become sites for gender based human rights violations, right? The first one would be prompt engineering methodologies should be embedded, and this gives developers a lot more control over user interactions with the Gen AI service. Secondly, I think there are a bunch of responsibilities rather that businesses can undertake in terms of governance more broadly. And when we speak of that, it refers to making transparent their communications while dealing with concerns around human rights, especially if it's impacting specific gender identities, right? It's important for them to appropriately attribute, provide disclaimers, provide caveats wherever relevant to build user awareness and understanding of the model itself. And lastly, of course, conduct technology impact assessments, and not just conduct it but also make sure that they communicate the findings um, in a language that is understandable by lay persons, and also then work towards the areas of concerns and share these practices publicly. So I would like to wrap up, and I'll just take another minute, is that like through this entire process, what we have sought to do is adopt the approach of unrisking, which in essence basically refers to, identifying what the risks could look like at every stage of building the GenAI tool itself, and then attempting to mitigate the risks. Now, this approach essentially enables all the systems to work together towards upholding the human rights that have been upheld through various declarations and various conventions, which even we as India are a party to, right? And it is that unrisking is that one route to really improve gender outcomes and preservation of human rights. And it really it gives developers the ability to put all their strategic efforts in place that address harms that emerge from the GenAI ecosystem. And my only last closing thought, and this is from an article that I recently came across, which is that how we think of gender itself really determines how the systems are built. And it's the fact that when we speak of gender and intersectionality, I think it's always important for us to lead in by thinking from an intersectional perspective rather from a gendered lens only, given that I think the speaker before me, ma'am, had, I think, very categorically mentioned that very many of this is not just a gender issue, but it is also an intersectional problem of how gender really intersects with many of the other factors that exist in society. So it is when we think of building gender friendly AI, Gen AI, or even AI for that matter, I don't think that we should always lead in with only gender as a lens. We should always lead in with a more broader intersectional lens, and then gender just becomes a part of it. And it's also kind of puts into perspective the way we think of gender itself as a topic, which is that you don't think of building a system and then looking at how you can then make it more gender friendly, because then that automatically gives you the perception that gender was an afterthought, and it is never an afterthought. It's always something that you have to it's something that you have to think about right from the get go. And that's my only last closing thought. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very clarion call in terms of making Gen AI gender friendly AI. I mean, just to summarize what Aishani had mentioned, in this age of artificial intelligence, perhaps we will have to use our natural intelligence in trying to make AI humane and unbiased, which we generally, ought to neglect. And the second approach of value chain approach, which intends to, at every stage, take proactive steps and not be reactive of trying to rectify what has been made as a mistake, but rather be proactive in what she called as unrisking approach, in trying to evolve models, in trying to collect data, in trying to deploy models that are not only gender, but from a humane perspective, does not violate any of the human rights per se. And another important aspect which she brought into light is more than just showcasing, because of the sudden boom of use cases of AI or Gen AI these days, perhaps the flip side of it is also coming out more vigorously or based on various studies and researches. But it's now time for us to, in fact, look back into our basics to ensure that there's no further damage happening through the use of Gen AI. And so a little shift from just concentrating on use cases and rather trying to follow a value chain based approach in unrisking generation AI as such is going to be of importance to us. Now, further complication to all of this, or further challenges to all of what was mentioned, is the legal provisions of TPDP Act and so on and so forth. So, data is the currency of the age, and therefore handling it, collecting it, processing it, and based on that arriving at algorithms or models for deployment for use cases, we will really have to be careful and above all be sensitive in ensuring that there is no violation of any aspect per se. So that was a very good, inspiring talk, and perhaps you all can Google out to find out the checklist that APTI has come out with. And trying to find out whether AI or Gen AI, more precisely, does not violate any of the basic human rights principles. So that is also an interesting study or interesting checklist which people involved in development of AI can actually look at. Now, the final concluding session, I would just take 5 to 10 minutes to briefly present about the work which we have done at Wikaspedia, and also wrap up today's webinar. I'll just share my screen. I trust my screen is visible. So from the angle of all the challenges that have been raised throughout these 3 sessions in terms of designing principles, in terms of the UI UX part, which is more important to champion inclusivity, in trying to bridge the gaps, not only just information gaps, but all the intersectional aspects that are behind that. And moving on to emerging technologies like Gen AI in order to ensure that they are used responsibly. All these 3 elements in a way are captured in the project of Wikaspedia. And that's why we just would like to briefly share of how we, in a small way, are actually democratizing multilingual digital information for women empowerment in Wikaspedia. So to briefly introduce Wikaspedia, it's a Ministry of Electronics and IT initiative that augments AI ecosystem in order to ensure better Indian language resources and its availability and access in the cyberspace for citizen empowerment. So this AI augmented digital ecosystem has primarily 4 important pillars. The stakeholder, where all stakeholders, be it industry, academia, line ministries, extension agencies, or civil society organizations, are all brought under the umbrella so that an unbiased representation of various stakeholders who interact with the community or with the citizens are captured in the project. And the second is the technology backbone, which is an AI-enabled crowdsourcing platform, which gives the provision of shared ownership and collaborative knowledge sharing access and creation using AI-enabled language tools. The third pillar is the capacity enablers. Much was talked about, lack of capacities as also an inhibiting factor. So one pillar of Wikaspedia talks about how do we enable capacities of the first level service providers, especially in this Gen AI type of ecosystem for multilingual information access and sharing. And fourth important pillar is the knowledge enabler, whereby we network the shared wisdom of people in terms of domain, in terms of languages, in terms of technology background, to network them as e-communities of practice across, that intersectional aspect which was talked about much, so that all aspects of information access and sharing is actually captured through this type of e-communities of practice. So we just started in last April with the objective of covering all 22 Indian languages besides English, and generating about 10 crore information resources that are pro-development, and in fact building the capacities of at least 1 crore service providers who can actively engage in creation of this type of information resources that are pro-citizen and pro-development. Yeah, The current 1 year of our journey, this is where we are. Vikaspedia.in is actually the collaborative knowledge sharing platform that's made available, and 30 e-communities of practice covering about 8 livelihood sectors and 22 constitutionally recognized languages besides English have been created. And we have close to about 5.8 lakh collaborators and 150 plus institutions who are associated as part of these communities of practice, and close to about 9 million information resources on various sectors from agriculture, health, social welfare, energy, governance, water, environment, and most recently, women empowerment have also been created and have been hosted. And the platform currently has, about 3 million page views per day. 68% of them belong to rural, and 90% of them are mobile prepaid users who access this over their resource constrained, network or bandwidth. Of course, the very interesting factor, as was highlighted. By all the three speakers in today's session, that there is, in spite of mining through a lot of data collections, we still are, lacking a gender segregated data to understand what exactly are the informational requirements or the footprints of navigation or the requirements of utility throughout the platform between to some extent, yes, between men and women is capturable, but amongst the heterogeneity of the women groups, we still are, this is a bottleneck. It continues to be a bottleneck, which perhaps we'll have to give better thought in the coming days. Now we have this Vikaspedia is also a classic case of AI and content management system fusion, whereby AI tools have been deployed for various as Aishani was talking about the value chain of information, right from the aggregation or development to dissemination to utility and plowing back as data sets for creation of AI models. So the complete value chain, we have in fact integrated AI tools from the content generation perspective, like we have assisted drafting tools, and then to have a UI UX, especially from the mobile perspective, in order to make it a multi-device compatible and engaging in aesthetic, tools have been integrated, and personalized content delivery. This is one interesting approach whereby based on the navigation or the footprint of a user in the platform and cross-checking with his or her the profile which has been added, we come up with an analytics in order to recommend topics of interest to a particular user. And we have noticed that without our knowledge, we have most of the times have been blind, as one of the speakers talking about gender blind spots. There are gender blind spots which we have talked. For example, when somebody was searching, when a woman from a rural area in the domain of agriculture searches for implements, by default, the recommended information topic is to hand weeder or a low energy or low power implement is what is shown as recommended topics. So there are inherent biases which we have come across and which we are trying to rectify by of course, unfortunately, it's been a proactive approach, but better late than never has been a strategy in trying to rectify. And perhaps that is why this webinar itself was organized in order to be an eye opener for most of us. And then voice-based services, given the literacy type of the gaps or the divides. And then we also have implemented AI-based tools for content testing. Content summarization is one area, and knowledge graphs is one area which tries to put on a canvas a complete gamut of knowledge that is available on any information that user searches for. And knowledge discovery, especially from a chatbot. I mean, it's interesting to understand when we were trying to design an icon for a chatbot. By default, we had an inclination towards a female, and as was pointed out by Aishani, service is equal to female, and perhaps security was equal to male. So those inherent cultural, social biases have to be rectified proactively from a human intelligence point of view is what has been our experience to in our journey. But through the process of this 1 year on analyzing most of our results of AI, though Wikaspedia platform to our best possible extent has been made inclusive by design and access, not only from a woman perspective or a gender perspective, from across various facets in terms of engagement and participation features, in terms of content scope being pro-development, unbiased to any specific community or population, and authenticity ensured in terms of review mechanisms, transparency in terms of what was reviewed, what was rejected, what was deleted, so on and so forth, and making it as a free and open source with a Creative Commons type of license, explicit multilingual focus in order to engage with the last mile, and especially from a geographic angle, as Dr. Joseph was also mentioning, the rural, urban, especially the vulnerable, like we have the aspirational districts and now the aspirational blocks, the northeastern region, and the LWE type of affected areas. So that information is made available through all these areas, literacy and accessibility point of view, which is more importantly coming out these days. Standards compliance, of course, as was also reiterated, compliance, the legal frameworks per se are evolving, and whatever are available in terms of the GIGW, or in terms of privacy, in terms of security, have been met with. But we understand, a lot has to be done in these areas. And importantly, following the principles of responsible use of AI, which has been integrated as part of the platform. It is inclusive by delivery by following these approaches currently. It's ad-free, and there is multimodal type of delivery, so that it doesn't stick to a specific device or a type of content, or in terms of whatever a user want to view is kept open based on the user preference, and it is not thrusted upon by the platform. A mobile first approach, though, has been followed in order to cater to a wider rural audience, for whom, as I mentioned, close to 80% are mobile prepaid users of the platform. And still, to address the access divide, which Dr. Manishri was also talking about, an online and offline presence has been carefully integrated as part of the platform, and factors related to resource constraints in terms of bandwidth, in terms of the design, in terms of how much of content a person can take. So many resource constraints have also been best possible extent factored while designing and in terms of information delivery in the platform. While these are common across all areas, with respect to women per se, we have mandated that any microsite or any community of practice is launched. There is an exclusive section which talks about women, and, like, for example, women in agriculture, or women in energy, or if it is health, the reproductive, adolescent health. So exclusive section which at least caters to 30 to 40% of the content is around women and their association with this particular sector or a particular language. And of late, we have also launched an exclusive community of practice on women empowerment, whereby we are trying to, across stakeholders, across languages, across domains, trying to pull in resources which are crowdsourced and collaboratively created and shared on this particular topic of women empowerment. And another interesting area is right from the complete value chain of from people who watch to people who contribute to people who review, and the bots which are used to ensure that the formattings are right, and so on and so forth. Women are there, fortunately, in all stages of this value chain. But the challenge here is it's very limited when compared to, like, we have still a 30-70 relationship between the availability and involvement of women in all these value chain in content management in Wikaspedia when compared to other areas. In that way, we are still a shortfall, not even the basic of 33%, which is mandated even in constitutional rights. So policies and guidelines have been laid out for each of the content management approach, where there is a sensitive, approach and deliberate approach, mentioning about the use of language, the depiction of image, citing resources, and even the review approaches in order to remove any bias that is likely to happen throughout the value chain. Content scope per se, it is identified through user feedback, especially when it comes to women, and stakeholder consultations are taken, so that we ask, as somebody was mentioning, a community-based approach, a community involvement in order to understand what they need, and not trusting what is available in the cyberspace with respect to women empowerment. Engagement and participation, both online and offline, has been one of the important areas which we have incorporated in every stage of our development deployment. And the responsible use of AI, especially in terms of involving community in evaluating the use cases for which it has been deployed, be it content drafting or content discovery or machine translation or whatever it is. And also an elaborate report abuse feature, which includes this nuances also, so that it can be either mitigated, or at least the best possible thing could be moving on to better models which address such bottlenecks have also been taken. When it comes to inclusive by delivery, especially when we work for outreach, we have started leveraging on women communities in terms of SHG federations, or in terms of women colleges, or in terms of other setup who have a say, or who are our primary users of these sections, to understand whether their intended information needs are being met through the platform. So there's a long journey to go, but deliberate efforts are being taken in order to be inclusive, not only by design and access, but also when we deliver the information that is accrued or aggregated or collaboratively shared by various stakeholders on the platform. And the mode and media selection is also being sensitized in order to be women friendly. Like, for example, if it is a video, and then mostly when it comes to reproductive health, or when it comes to information that are very sensitive. In fact, one of the research reports, or one of the impact assessment reports of Wikaspedia taken up by Tata Institute of Social Sciences, have highlighted that one of the most important utility of Wikaspedia is in meeting the reproductive information needs of women, because the way we show such sensitive information on the platform, though this platform is not meant only for women, it's open for all, but the way we show it, the board and the media we select in order to highlight such sensitive information is very carefully articulated, so that the woman who's watching it or reading it is never feels inconvenient or uncomfortable. So these are some deliberate steps which we have taken, and of course the greatest advantages with most of stakeholders, and even the team perhaps is being led by women leaders. I mean, which was rightly pointed out by the critical mass of people, or the leadership is also important in making design and delivery inclusive for women type of audience. So these are some highlights which we thought we would a flag or share it with the audience today. Of course, to summarize, whether it is our experience of democratizing multilingual digital information for women empowerment, or designing for everybody, with inclusivity in mind from the design perspective, or bridging digital information gaps, or building Gen AI gender friendly. All these are just small steps which we have taken, but to sum up, there's a lot more to be done across all. So it's a lot of convergence in terms of stakeholders, in terms of policy frameworks, in terms of legal frameworks, in terms of capacities, in terms of data, in terms of research, in terms of engaging community. I think there's really miles to go. And but the good point is it has started gaining traction, and we hope in the coming days, this gains momentum to such a way that artificial intelligence or technology or innovation remains unbiased to any sector of the population, including gender or women, perhaps. So with this, we would like to thank the speakers of today, and also the participants, Neeta Madam, Dr. Vani Shri, and Daishani Rai, and all the people who have taken their time to be with us. Unfortunately, we do not have time to take up questions, but each of the speakers have given us speaker notes, which we would be circulating to all the interested participants. And you can, we have shared the communication in the contact details in terms of our mail address and WhatsApp number. So we have queries which have to be addressed by any of the speakers can also be forwarded to us, which we would definitely get back to you with the responses of the concerned speakers. So with this, I would like to really thank each and every member who has been instrumental in organizing the Wikaspedia team, CDAC, METI, the leadership in CDAC Hyderabad, and all the participants today, and most importantly, the speakers. Though it's a Holy Week, people have taken time to come and then present whatever have been their expertise and experience in terms of the topics that have been deliberated today. So with this, I would really like to thank each and every one of you for making this session a fruitful one. We hope this was an eye-opener session, and in the coming days, each of these topics would be deliberated in detail through such webinars. Thank you.